Oh, cool. The quality's still garbage. I don't understand. I don't know what's happening. Oh no, it's back up. Good. Fine. Let me see if I can actually make the PowerPoint behave. So let's just do a regular roll. Oops, wrong one. Animation. Just start PowerPoint. No. Why won't it work? I mean, I assume me going through it doesn't do anything. Let's watch it and find out. No, so what's the bloody point? It's damn near 9 o'clock. Why can't... What did I do last time that fixed it? I mean, was this a problem last time? I don't remember it being a problem last time. I just don't understand. Oh, wait. Wait. There was... I don't want to do that. Streaming. There we go. Alright. Hold on. That's what has screwed me up. Isn't it? Cool! We're only 30 minutes into class. Alright, well, let me resend this out. Excuse me. Issues with the PowerPoint. New URL is as follows. Sorry for the confusion. Okay. Oh my god. Alright, so we get to the Opium Wars. Japan. Caucasus. Sepoy Rebellion. Alright, I'm going to have to jump right into this. What a pain in the ass. So, go live. We did the Sepoy Rebellion. In India. Basically, the cartridge here used grease, which was either cow fat or pig fat, which would have pissed off either the Hindus or the Muslims, because those were the two big religious groups in India. So, you know, you're losing hearts and minds all over India. Good stuff. This caused an uprising in India, which the British were able to put down, but it took a year and a half, which ended with the East India Company no longer being in control of India and Parliament taking direct control. Which, again, I know that I was unable to give you guys the proper link last time, but I did have the other. Well, I had both videos up, so hopefully you guys had time to check those out. So, moving on to the colonial soldier, the culture of empire. Now, it's said that Europe itself had a, quote, long peace. Let me blow my nose here. $30 late, so, you know, take my time, right? A long peace between 1815 and 1914, so, you know, the end of the Napoleonic Wars and the beginning of World War One. Sure, there was the various wars of German unification, the various rebellions and whatnot, but there was no real large war. I mean, the wars of German unification were quite short. Not a lot. I mean, the biggest war there, the Franco-Prussian War, lasted a couple of weeks, and that's not really a war. Not really. I mean, it's embarrassing, is what it is. However, there was lots of wars around the rest of the world in the name of imperialism. Now, the soldiers who fought in these wars were usually lower class, going into the service for the sake of escaping poverty or debt. So, kind of like what we do now. It's like, oh yeah, join the service and we'll pay for your college if you make it back alive. Let's see. Yeah, the mortality rate for the soldiers was very high, both in transit and the colony they were fighting in, because going in these ships to and from the colonies was very unhealthy, and it was like a 50% chance you die just getting there. But also, once you got to the colony, it wasn't just, oh, well, let's, stomp some natives. There was still a pretty good chance you wouldn't make it back. Now, that said, it was usually disease that killed these Europeans. But also these so-called savages, that, oh, they're not a threat. They don't have guns. Sometimes they did have guns. Sometimes they were better equipped and better prepared than it was suggested. Now, a lot of the time, the soldiers who were doing the fighting were actually natives. Now, this was in the case of India, the sepoys. They would just pay or coerce these native soldiers in helping them out and to extend their hold so they wouldn't have to, pay the Europeans to come and fight. So, the casualties wouldn't be all Europeans, for one, and also the disease probably wouldn't be as bad for the natives, at least for like things like malaria. They'd be more accustomed to it. I'm sorry, you want to go over there? Just do whatever you want, cat. I'm here to serve. Alright. Anyway. This is one of my favorite pictures of these colonial soldiers posing for their photograph, and the one dude's just like, I'm going to lay out on the front. A collection of 19th century mustaches here and there. This one dude here in the back with this just massive mustache, and then, clearly he's making up for his bald head. I don't know what this guy's argument is. He's got plenty of hair, but also the big mustache. A lot going on. I think this guy's actually got a cigarette as well. Yeah, lots of good stuff. They've all got their pith helmets, which is your typical European explorer helmet. Good stuff. By good stuff, I mean they were horrible to anyone who wasn't European, but imperialism. Now, since the time of the Middle Ages, it was felt by some Europeans that they should spread the gospel. It was, their calling. the Age of Exploration, missionaries were going to the New World, the Far East, and of course we had the Jesuit order, which I may have mentioned before. The Jesuits were essentially militant missionaries. I think I've made the joke before that it's like, so the Mormons that come and knock on your door, it's like that, but they kick the door down, and also usually are spreading disease from Europe that the natives couldn't handle. But some Jesuits were sincere, others were, as I said, a bit more violent. Now we have Karl Gutzlaff. He was a German missionary in Asia. Um, he learned the cultures, languages, religions of the countries he visited. That's supposed to be a he. And worked hard to translate the Bible into Thai and Chinese. Thai and Chinese are definitely not the same language, so that took a lot of doing. So well done, Karl Gutzlaff. And then Dr. David Livingstone, who we may know from high school history, who was a missionary, geographer, opponent to the slave trade, but he's most famous for getting himself lost in Africa, which resulted in a 2-year search by the reporter Henry Stanley, who finally found David Livingstone. Livingstone later died in Africa, looking for the headwaters of the Nile, and then Stanley mapped the area in Africa and later played a large role in the scramble for Africa, which we'll get to hopefully before the end of class, now that I've wasted so much time trying to get this stupid PowerPoint behaving. We've got a lot of material left. I don't think we're going to get this scramble of Africa. Stupid PowerPoint. So there's Gutzlaff, as we said, adopting the language and culture. Pardon me, very not German there. Here's Livingstone. Yeah, the thing about Livingstone, the reason it was such a thing is that he would write back to newspapers in England, and so like I wouldn't say every week, but regularly the newspapers would publish his letters. So it was like the people in England were sort of there with him. They felt like it was like they were part of the journey. And then it just stopped. And so like the entire country of England was just, oh, we've got to save him. It wasn't just some dude that got lost. It was somebody that they all identified with, and that's why the newspaper reporter Henry Stanley was the one who went out and searched for him, because again he was involved in that whole mess. It's a whole interesting story that I feel like I could probably do a bit more research into, or you guys could if that's what you want to do for your paper. I'll talk about the second paper later on. There's lots of options, of course, but that whole drama is quite interesting. And there's Henry Stanley with his explorer helmet. Yeah, so he found Livingstone, and Livingstone's like, okay, yeah, I'm here, but I'm not leaving Africa. I'm searching for the headwaters of the Nile. So, these Europeans were spreading all across the globe, and they were bringing back artifacts, new species, and treasures to their home countries. Of course, this was for science, um, but just resulted in lots of looting and tomb raiding and, just taking what they wanted. Obviously, mapping out areas was not new, but the world now opening up Europeans was making many seeking out new and unexplored areas, which got many of them killed. It's like, oh, I've got to be the first to this place. I got to be the first to map out this area, and you know, the reason it hadn't been mapped out is it's dangerous, and now you're dead. Zoology, botany, archaeology, scientists and explorers trying to find a new species, new treasure, something new and exciting. Again, this was the 19th century. This is where you get a lot of your the pulp fiction of explorers and archaeologists and just really any of that idea of, oh, we've got to be the first to this temple in this jungle or find a lost species. This was where, I mean, this was not long before, because of the technology, but this was the time period that people had in mind when, like, King Kong came about. Of this was a new species, this was a new land, some lost civilization. That's that sort of idea. And as we said, all these collecting had downsides. Some animals went extinct or became endangered. Lots of cultural artifacts were destroyed or pillaged from the people they belonged to. That happened a lot because Europeans being Europeans. We have a lot of animal species here. And this was how they were cataloged. This was how they were cataloged artistically when they weren't just like put in a jar of formaldehyde and put on a shelf. I was gonna say maybe it's from Australia because we've got a wallaby here, but there's also an elephant, so I guess this is just from all over. Because we've got an anteater here, terrapin. There's a skate, squid of some sort. There's a snake. It's like a lynx. So yeah, that's just from all over. So yeah, there's a family, including the kid, just hanging out on some Egyptian ruins, because that's what you do. So, now as we had said, I've got this a bit higher than I meant for it to. Not that you guys necessarily need to see me for the sake of the class. Sorry, I was up later last night than I should have been. Anyway, so Europeans are bringing in resources. They're also sending out their cultural advancement, sewing machines, as I mentioned, railroads, these ideas, free trade, popular sovereignty, meritocracy, these things that were European in concept. Of course, though, this wasn't necessarily always good. the idea of race as a defining factor became a thing, because of course it did, particularly after the Sepoy Rebellion. This was the time when we had social Darwinism. Now, it's not fair to call it that, because that wasn't what Darwin was talking about, but they used his arguments to make their argument, because, racist gonna be racist. But social Darwinism argued that certain races were unable or unfit to govern themselves, and that the white races had an obligation to rule over them, because, of course, this was parodied and summarized in Rudyard Kipling's The White Man's Burden, which might be at the back of this chapter. Let's find out. No. What is this? Congo Free State. We'll talk about that in a minute. It doesn't talk about the white man's bird. That's a shame. I mean, it's like once you realize that it's a parody, it's quite amusing. I mean, it's, again, for the 1800s, it's really really tongue in cheek. It's like, oh, we've got so much to deal with here, being in charge of everything and making everybody else do our work. But woe is us. Okay, so we talked about the first two waves of colonialization. Get more water before the next class. So post 1860, we've really run out of exploitation colonies. Oops. So increased industrial output. We got new markets around the world. China and the Ottoman Empire falling apart. The entrepreneurs are pushing in these regions to make lots of money. And this was when the Suez Canal was being funded and a railway across the Ottoman Empire was being built. So lots of major industrial projects. And as I said, the Suez Canal was such a big deal that, like, Egypt kind of fell apart. So this was the second industrial revolution. This was beyond textiles. This was now what you, at least what I think of when I think of the Industrial Revolution. You've got your steel, you've got steamships, telegraph wires, much larger machines, much more powerful machines. So a faster spread, tighter control of these bigger empires. So faster travel, more tight communications. In terms of medical advances, there were cheaply manufactured quinine tablets, so the Europeans could start moving into sub-Saharan Africa. So they would... It wasn't a cure for malaria, it just meant that they could resist it better. And breech-loading rifle and the Maxim gun meant that they could murder lots of people easier. There's the Maxim gun. That looks familiar. This would cause issues once the Europeans started fighting each other. Oh wow, did just... Oh no, I didn't. So, by the 1830s, the Ottoman Empire was falling apart. Egypt and Tunisia were doing their own thing. The Greeks had their land. France had taken Algeria. after the Crimean War, France and bleh, Britain and France were really holding the Ottoman Empire up. Now, that big block of text there, that's the whole Suez Canal thing. So, Egypt had their independence, but they racked up debts with Britain and France again, trying to modernize. Uh, so, his successor allowed for the building of the Suez Canal to try and pay off that debt. So, this canal was 10 miles long and was a big deal, especially for Britain, because then they wouldn't have to go around the tip of Africa, as I mentioned there. But debts remain unpaid. Britain purchased a near controlling share in the canal's company. There was an uprising that Britain crushed. And as I said, they took control of Egypt. I mentioned this at the beginning of the class last week. And they made it a protectorate in 1982. So Britain more or less controlled Egypt, but mostly just so that they could keep the canal safe so that they could get to and from India more easily and securely. Because really, all British foreign policy was make sure India's safe. So there's the Suez Canal being built. These big barges, I guess dredgers? What would be the right word for that? I don't know. I mean, they're dredging the sand up. Anyway, here's a line to consider a better picture than that because it doesn't have the big watermark across the front of it. And it's not even a terribly wide canal either. I mean, the Suez Canal isn't necessarily huge. So here it is upon completion, and again, it's kind of crowded. But as I said, it's it's better than going all the way around Africa, especially for Britain. I've got some lag. I think I'll pop down the quality a little bit for my next class. All right. As long as the audio is okay, that's what matters. So, after everything with India and Britain having a few headaches with that, the European empires didn't want to directly take over mainland China. It was, that's just millions and millions of people. It would have been a nightmare. So, they left it alone, but as it weakened, foreign powers, including Japan, because Japan and China had been at war since the world was young, began taking lands that were under Chinese control, or at least Chinese influence. Because the thing about the thing about the world before, really the United Nations, is countries didn't have to be conquered by other countries to still be under the control or to be under the influence of a larger country. Because, like, let's pretend, well, I mean, like the Bahamas. Let's say the Bahamas were independent, but, they're right there beside the United States, and if there was no other countries to keep us from just bullying them, we could say, hey, Bahamas, you should, pay us taxes because we're here and we're stronger than you. Then they'd probably be good with paying us taxes. So France began taking lands that become Vietnam. Thanks, France. That will become an issue later. Came into direct conflict with China in the Sino-French War of 1884 to 1885. The French beat the crap out of the Chinese. So they took modern-day Laos and Cambodia and created Southeast Asia Empire, which became Indochina. The Dutch began taking land, and as we'd said, the Dutch, despite being not having a ton of land in Egypt, or use your words, not having a ton of land in Europe, were very powerful on the sea and did build quite an empire for a little while. Divide and control their own opium trade that bribed, coerced, and forced the natives of the Dutch East Indies to march to their tune. In Bali and Aceh, held off the Dutch for a little while. They eventually took these regions for the Dutch. What do you want, cat? Well, get up here. Hey. Let me wipe your eye. Get eye goop. So, there's Indochina. Cambodia. Vietnam. So yeah, now this is, 1941 with Japan and whatnot, but it shows French Indochina down there at the bottom. Excuse me. And the Netherlands Indies further down. Okay. Well, we've still got time. Good. So, China and, well, I guess you'd just say Turkey, the Ottoman Empire, was, sorry, were falling apart. And these lands were opening up, so the British were concerned for India, because as I said, that's always what the British are worried about. Because the Russian Empire is constantly expanding, so there was this concern that Russia would begin pressuring India, and the British didn't want that, so there was constant skirmishes and basically pointless bloodshed that Rudyard Kipling called the Great Game, and that's still a thing. Lots of pointless bullshit going on over tiny incremental bits of land. Afghanistan. That sounds familiar. British moved into Afghanistan in 1939 because the Russians were pushing to have the Emir of Kabul to side with them. The Emir fled, the British took over, but surprise, surprise, the people didn't like them there, and the British had to leave within 3 years. They invaded again in 1878 and then pulled out again in 1881. Showing just how hard it was to hold on to that part of the world. maybe maybe some people in power should actually learn from history. The Russians expanded control where they had a little bit of power anyway, Turkestan and Transcapia, uh, but didn't really settle them. They just, you know, took over a little bit more. Eh. And this wasn't really uh, outright warfare. This was just shades of red or blue on a map. The two empires trying to best each other, and as was said, never truly going to war. Uh, here we have a painting of an event there in Afghanistan. Sorry, I got a message, got distracted. In case you don't know where Afghanistan is, this was after 1893. Okay, I guess we will get to the scramble for Africa. So, we had the Suez Canal, Quinine, Diamond Rush of 1870 and 71. Created an interest for Africa, but it was in the intrigues of King Leopold II that got the scramble started. As I have mentioned before, Leopold is a piece of crap. Now, Leopold could not have an empire. He was a constitutional monarch, and he couldn't take regions over in the name of an empire. So, he used a loophole and created the International Geographic Conference in Brussels, and called on the Belgians to bring, my typos there, the light of civilization to Africa, with him at the head, because of course. Hired Henry Stanley, remember him, to lead the mapping expeditions. And the Belgians had a prosperous set of trading stations in sub-Saharan Africa. But the Portuguese and French also had posts in the area, and there was almost a war. And Britain started backing Portugal just to make things worse. So Germany decided, hey, we're not involved, so let's go to Berlin and have a chat. So the Europeans, including the Germans, would carve up Africa in regards to their own interest, which would just make things worse for the future. So there's Leopold. We'll talk more about Leopold in a minute. So rather than going to war, they decided to split up Africa in ways that would suit them, and Germany got a piece of the pie because they were there? So the French got a big chunk in West Africa. The Portuguese got land in southwest Congo. The British got land along the Nile and from South Africa. We'll talk about that in a minute. Cecil Rhodes wanted a Cape to Cairo railroad. He wanted land from South Africa all the way up to Egypt, and they got almost all of that, but there's a region I'll show you guys in a minute. The Germans, though, took part of the Congo in a spot in East Africa, which was in the middle of where Britain was. And Leopold became the king sovereign of a Congo Free State. Now, the thing about that is that his actions in this Congo Free State made Belgium, and of course himself, a lot of money, while he committed horrible, inhumane acts against the native Africans. Rubber and ivory were the exports, which were used by the natives to pay taxes. The natives were forced to basically retool their economy to suit Leopold. So they weren't growing food, and if they didn't grow enough rubber, they would be punished. And we'll get to that in just a moment. These were so bad that Joseph Conrad used the Congo as a setting for his novel Heart of Darkness. If you haven't read Heart of Darkness, you probably should. It's really good. So there's everybody trying to take Italy. We'll talk about the Boers in a minute. I don't know why. I mean, everybody's just really ridiculous. Yeah, here we go. So, the British had all of this, but Africa, or Germany had this here, and Cecil Rhodes wanted to go all the way up. I mean, Cecil even had Rhodesia, for goodness sake. Now, we'll talk about the Belgian Congo in just a moment. So, yeah, if you didn't produce enough rubber, he would cut your hand off, even if you were a child. And as I said, his treatment of these people, I feel like, should be... I mean, and it wasn't just like he, you know, I shouldn't say just, but like lots of people died in the Congo Free State. And he should be remembered as a monster, because he really was. I'm going to try and get a little bit further if I can, so that we can try and remain in tune with the other class. Okay, so in 75, Europeans controlled 11% of Africa. By 1890, 90% was under European control. Needless to say, this led to lots of resistance. In Ethiopia, local resistance armed with European guns destroyed the invading Italian army at Atwa in 1896. That's why the Italian army remains a historical joke. Other European power tried to bribe or coerce the natives to submission, sometimes giving them partial control. The Germans did lots of awful things in Africa. Maji Maji Uprising took 2 years to put down. In southwestern Africa, when the Herero captured several German settlements. So the German troops killed 50,000 Herero men, women, and children, drove the rest into the desert, poisoned their wells, crammed the survivors into concentration camps, as one does. So 80,000 Herero and 20,000 Nama, which was just a neighboring tribe, which was 80% of the Herero nation, which was genocide, as you do. So here's the Ethiopian folks whooping the Italians. And this is what happens when people are put in a concentration camp. You starve. And you die of disease when you put people in cages. I'm going to do the Box Rebellion next time. Okay, so as I mentioned last time, but like I said, I didn't have the right URL up. I put the, or I've worked on the test, and I I intend to put it up on Blackboard on Thursday, the test from last time. It's going to be essay based. So, FYI, it's going to be essay based. It's going to have 9 questions, and you guys pick 4 that you're comfortable with. And it's going to be on, like, there's going to be basically 3 per chapter. So it's going to be like 3 major points per chapter. And it's like, oh, 9 essays. No, don't worry about it. It's like 3 major points per chapter, like 2 or 3 paragraphs. I mean, it's take home, so you're going to be using your books, using your material. Just make sure that what you give me is concise and well written. So yeah, sorry for all the issues with technology. I forgot that I needed to set the layout this way. I had forgotten that was a thing that needed to be done. So yeah, we'll do the Box Rebellion next time. And finish this chapter up and move on to the next chapter, which I don't even remember what it is. The Crisis of Liberalism and the Making of Mass Society next time. So look forward to that. Anyway, I'm going to go use this 15 minutes to get me a bite to eat and then prepare for the next class. So yeah. Hold on. Let me go back to the thing. Cool. Okay. Have a good day. See you guys on Thursday. I didn't see very many people in here at all, so try and show up next time. I mean, unless you guys are showing up for the other class. I don't know. Anyway, take care. See you guys later. Bye.